Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
So welcome back. So accustomed to go around and say our names. Let's take a breath or a beat between people. Let them digest. My name is Cass.
My name is Alzak.
Greg.
My name is Michael.
I'm Grisha.
My name is Harley.
I'm Jim.
I'm Bob.
I'm Andreas.
I'm Matthew.
My name is Jerry.
My name is Jeff.
I'm Ed.
My name is Larry.
I am one.
Jack.
Jody.
Stephen.
I'm Brad.
My name is Paul. I'm Tim. Peter.
I'm Hal.
I'm Richard.
My name is Joe.
Michael.
Don.
Andre.
Wow. We're honored today to have J.D. Doyle as our Dharma speaker. J.D. has practiced Buddhism since 1997 in the U.S., Thailand, and Burma. Serves as core teacher at East Bay Meditation Group Center, EBMC, one of the most diverse sanghas in the world, it's been called. Has served as board member and was co-founder of the LGBTQIA2 meditation group, also known as the Alphabet Sangha. Completed the Spirit Rock Dedicated Practitioner Program and Community Dharma Leader Program, and is currently in the Spirit Rock Teacher Training Program. J.D. holds a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Cornell University and a master's degree in language and literacy and sociocultural studies from the University of New Mexico. For 25 years, they have worked as a public school teacher focusing on issues of equity and access. J.D. identifies as gender non-conforming, committed to celebrating the diversity of our human sangha, addressing the impact of racism on our communities, expanding concepts of gender, living in ways that honor the sacredness of the earth. JD's website is www.heartmindteaching.com, and as I was looking at that site, I was like, I know this person, but it's no, I just want to know this person. So welcome, JD.
Thank you so much. Whew, oh my goodness. Well, you know, I have to say I am really honored to be here because I think the longevity of the Gay Buddhist Fellowship is very, very inspiring. And, you know, that to me is what the practice is about, you know, just keep coming back. And the person who brought me into the practice, I'm sure many of you know, is Eric Kolvik, who was one of the first, you know, gay Buddhist teachers in the U.S. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him, if I hadn't had that doorway of going in to somebody who I felt like understood me in terms of being gay. And I didn't know, you know, like I got into practice the way many of us do. I was dating someone at the time who said, do you want to go, you know, to this meditation? And I would have said yes, you know, to practically anything that she offered at that point. So, you know, I was like, I want to hang out with you. So sure, why not? And so that was, you know, we all get through whatever door it is. And we're not together anymore, but she continues in New Mexico on the Buddhist path, as do I. And it's been very fortunate that I had that connection, and so I feel really fortunate. And so that's one of the reasons why I appreciate the Gay Buddhist Fellowship, because it is that camaraderie and it is that perspective that we can relate to each other on. So I wanted to talk today about something really kind of primary, basic, but not, simple, but not easy kind of thing. And I just really wanted to come back to mindfulness and talk about mindfulness. And as you heard in my bio, I recently left teaching in the public schools after many, many years. And everybody was like, oh, so you're retiring. And I'm like, I don't want to say I'm retiring. I'm definitely not doing that job anymore, But it's not retiring, just sort of doesn't sound like there's like I still have to make a living, and I'm still, kind of trying to figure out how to be in the world. And so I did a ritual of beginning again, and, which is a very, sort of beginning again. And so I'm kind of bringing that attitude of beginning again today to like looking at mindfulness. And so I wanted to start off with this quote from the Buddha. And the Buddha said, who is your enemy? Mind is your enemy. No one can harm you more than a mind untrained, more than an untrained mind. Who is your friend? Mind is your friend. Nothing can help you more than a trained mind. It sounds kind of harsh. But, the thing that I really love about this and that I love about Buddhism is that there are instructions. We are not doomed to our life of suffering. There are instructions out there. And, the phrase that Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's one of the translators that I'm sure many of you know, uses uninstructed worldling. And, I love that, kind of like, I am an uninstructed worldling. It's sort of, when I think about that, I think about, like the aliens coming down and being like, oh, uninstructed worldling, kind of thing. And so, like, I feel like there's hope for me, that there's instructions out there that I'm going to be able to find, a way to create less suffering in this heart, mind, body. And so, this aspect of training the mind, and how do we train the mind, has been an ongoing practice in, figuring it out for me. And so, like so many of us, we live in the world and there's just disappointment in the world. And, for those of us, especially who find ourselves operating outside of the dominant heteropatriarchy, whatever we want to call it, the dominant paradigm, white supremacy, whatever those rules are that are kind of in the culture that are kind of trying to, herd us all into alignment. And especially for those of us who operate outside of that, there's a lot of disappointment, and there's disappointment for everyone, except for one of the things that I think those of us who rub up against those confines, we actually have a little bit more insight initially, because there's an understanding of like, I am the square peg that people are trying to put in the round hole, and there's that, kind of rubbing up against it. And so there's kind of an understanding that the world is providing disappointment, that those aspects of the world are not going to fulfill us, even though we still look for them, right? The girlfriend, the house, the car, the job, and we do want those things. It's not like we want everything to be suffering. So there is that, but there is that. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a little hard to hear.
Oh, okay, right. No, I didn't say anything. I just chuckled.
So, one of the images that the Buddha uses for this sense of disappointment is that those of us in this life are like, where we think we have like a nice meaty, sorry, those of you who are vegetarians, I think we have this nice meaty bone, or like a dog like gnawing on like a bare bone, and we think we're going to get sustenance from this, through all of these outward signs of appearances in the world. And so instead, when we come to our practice, and we come to this practice of, what does it mean to live in this world? What does it mean to begin to be awake to the fact that I'm not going to get sustenance through the sense doors? Doesn't mean it won't be pleasant, but I'm not going to get long-standing happiness, freedom through, the seeing, through the hearing, through the tasting, through the touch, smelling, and the mind. And that's how we engage. And there's really, like to me sometimes, like when the instructions, like there's only 6 instructions. What happens in the mind, what happens at the eye door, what happens at the nose, what happens at the mouth, what happens at the ears, taste. There's only 6 places that things can happen. So you think it would be pretty easy, right? Only 6. It's not. But then I guess if you figure out how many of those 6 are happening in each second and each minute, then it gets a little more complicated. And of course, humans, we make things more complex, and this gets in there. And so one of the places that I think is kind of like a both and for me in Buddhism is this really understanding that I bring this set of conditions of who I am, which happens to be, this white person raised in an Irish Catholic family in Massachusetts in a small town with 3 sisters and a mother and a father and a backyard, and, trained that education was the way to go forward in my life. That my parents were like, go to college, keep studying. That was really important. And so when I came to Buddhism, I used that same intellectual capacity to help myself learn and know the mind. And I found it very, very helpful. And I found it also limiting. And it was only when I began to realize that the translation into English of mindfulness is inadequate that I really began to realize, oh, I see what's happening here. Because when I first started practicing, I was up here in the mind, looking at the moment, seeing the moment, really trying to stay moment by moment, touching, hearing, tasting, smelling. And then somewhere along the line, as you probably have heard, the word citta in Pali is heart-mind. And so, then it makes you wonder, like, why did the translators not say heartfulness? They could have said heartfulness, right? They could have said heartfulness instead of mindfulness because they chose mind. But in a Western paradigm, come right now, come on. Where do we elevate? Our emotions or an intellect? We're kind of going to put them up here, the intellect. So then we come to mindfulness, and then we come from this background where I'm like, mind, and I think mind. There's a story that I heard of who's the monk who was doing a lot of stuff with the Dalai Lama, and they were doing all the trainings around studying the mind, and they were coming back to the monks to show them what they learned about studying the mind with all this sort of MRI and all these images, and they had PowerPoint. They're good researchers to show the monks, and they put up, and you've probably seen this picture of the monk with like all the kind of like wires and things sticking out of their head, and they're studying kind of what's going on. And the story that I love is that the monks just burst out laughing at seeing this picture of all these wires stuck to the head, and they were like, but this is the heart, this is where it happens. It happens in your heart. What are they doing with all these things on your head? They need to have it on your heart. And so, like, that was such an awakening, the sense of, like, we can't just be doing mindfulness from here. We have to really have it be heartfulness. Pema Chodron says, I want to emphasize the importance of maintaining an atmosphere of unconditional friendliness when you practice. And as you take your practice out into the world, we can practice for a lot of years. I know many people who practice for countless years, decades even, and somewhere along into their umpteenth year, it dawns on them that they haven't been using the practice to develop loving kindness for themselves. Rather, it's been somewhat aggressive meditation towards themselves, perhaps very goal-oriented. And so she is pointing to this place of what is the role, if we call it this heart mindfulness, what is the role of loving kindness in our mindfulness practice? Is it something that we can actually separate out? Or is it, I think Jack Kornfield has been using the term loving awareness now. instead of mindfulness, knowing that mindfulness can sometimes bring us to this place of sort of this, like we put our lab coats on and we're in the scientific realm and we're studying, what is happening from a very intellectual place, rather from meeting this moment, from befriending ourselves. And so I think of it for myself as really like this tenacious kindness. Because, I don't know about you, but I disappoint myself a lot. It's just like, where in the world did that come from? And if I'm lucky, my mindfulness kicks in. I'm like, oh, whoops, sorry. And if I'm a little slower, then I'm like a day later, or, you're reflecting and I'm like, oh, there's a little discomfort there. And so to me, it's really bringing in this tenacious kindness, this loving attention, loving awareness. So I find that like kind of shifting from this sort of like objective, like somehow I can come up with this sterile, like, I'm the scientist kind of being curious about this, what is JD going to do now, like observing, and kind of holding it with this overlay of kindness, sort of more like, like as if I were holding my hand when I was like a little kid and I'm exploring walking for the first time. So this attitude of this approach of kind of bringing in and more gentleness, allowance, and holding this attitude of the mind that it just has a little more nurturing in it, which isn't something that I was accustomed to when I was younger. There was this sense of keep trying, you can do it, just, fall down, get up, fall down. And that's a wonderful attitude. I really appreciate that. But there's some place in there that then sometimes when you fall down, you don't get up so easily, And so I really had to work on that part of the loving so that I wouldn't begin to beat myself up, because I know that for me, there was a lot of times when I was younger that I blamed myself for those times that I didn't fit in, that the rules didn't make sense. There was something within me, even though I was kind of like, I'm not so sure about that, but it just seemed like there's so many messages that I was the problem, not out there. And so this aspect of bringing in this loving awareness, this nurturing, has helped me soften that sense of me, like if I could figure this out, then I wouldn't have the disappointment. But the Buddha is teaching us, telling us that through this training, it's not about us getting it right. It's about meeting the moment. And how do we meet the moment? Many of you probably have heard Michelle McDonald, who is an insight teacher and originally from Maine, but now lives in Hawaii, right? Vipassana, Hawaii. So she says, any worthy endeavor in life takes a lot of dedication, good training, patience, and humor. Do the best you can to hold yourself capable for being in your life fully, with as much kindness and care as you can. Mindfulness gives us courage. You can move through deeply buried layers of fear, anger, or greed to find a more refined awareness infused with beauty and peace. I really appreciate this quote because she talks about, once again, you can see I'm talking about the longevity of this because you all have held this place with the Gay Buddhist Fellowship for 26 years, that this training is over and over again beginning anew. And the care that the mindfulness is withholding as much care and kindness as you can. And so this is speaking to this fact of, like, we can also begin to shame and blame ourselves for not having care. Like, oh, that was a little snarky, like, wow, you're really snarky today. And then begin the shame spiral there. And so as much as we can in the moment. And then the interesting word that she points to is courage. And I really appreciate this because to go with the flow and just kind of show up every day, go to work, get in your car, do what you're supposed to do, sometimes we can kind of get lost in this sort of fog of just doing what we do every day. But it really takes courage to show up. With the impermanence of the things in our lives, the impermanence of our body, our relationships, money, on and on. Courage. It takes courage to have the heart to really be there for the news. I mean, it takes courage to hear what we're doing at the border, what we're doing to people in this country, what we're doing, it takes courage to actually show up. Because that is unpleasant. There's a lot of harm in the world. And the thing that's interesting about courage is sometimes we think of courage as, these singular valiant acts of somebody, rescuing somebody out of the frozen river or something like that, which is, it's really wonderful to hear those news. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy when that happens. But courage actually comes from the French word for heart. And so courage is really about bringing heart. And so the courage to turn towards the suffering of the world, whether it's our own or that suffering around us. That takes a lot of courage. And then Michelle McDonald says, mindfulness gives us courage. And so in some ways we need courage to actually turn towards, but then the mindfulness can, in my understanding of that, can continue the courage because it allows us to see clearly and to extract and kind of pull apart all of those extra stories that we've laid on it. That we think means this because this and that, all the habits and conditions of who we are. And so one of the things that makes us come to is practice. Like, how do we practice to keep this going? And so there is a little bit, we have the idea in our Eightfold Path of effort. So it's not like we can just there is some effort going on. So there is that bit that I was talking about with the practice of falling down, getting up again. That is a part of it. And then there is this gentle, not judgmental, willful must, that we have to strengthen the mind to be able to return to the areas of discomfort. Because one of the things that happens is that there's this subtle story that I have realized in myself that I always had a sense that if I was doing this right, everything would be a lot more comfortable. And I thought for a long time that happiness meant comfort. And then, all you have to do is be in, an intimate relationship with somebody, and then the way to be intimate is to sit in the discomfort. That, if you're really wanting to know and be seen, there's going to be some discomfort there. And especially if we get in relationships across race, across age, across ability, so many different ways. I see the world this way, you see the world this way, and we want to join together. How do we know each other? There's going to be some discomfort there because if everybody saw the world the way I wanted, then, I wouldn't have my limited notion of the potentials of the world. How could I ever come to those beliefs that there's freedom? But I can be instructed. I can learn from all these different ways. And I can learn that happiness means that there's pleasant and unpleasant in the world. So I can use my mindfulness to see that. One of the ways that we can do that is by coming into the body. The first practice of mindfulness is mindfulness of the body. And so, once again, we can bring our awareness from the head, from the intellect, and come into the body. How is it now? What's happening now? And then, I'm sure you have begun to realize, like when you go in the body, you can begin to see, oh, that's contraction. Oh, that's expansion. Oh, that's connection. That's disconnection. You know, I remember the first time, like after I was practicing mindfulness for a while, and I was going for a walk with a friend. We were talking, and I stopped and was like, I just had a gut feeling, you know, like everybody's told me about these gut feelings they've had all their life, and I just had one. Like I was so disconnected from this body, you know, that I didn't know what a gut feeling felt like. And then I was like, oh, that's a gut feeling, and there it is. And you know, that luckily they had done some practice, so they were, and they, you know, kind of figured who I was. So they let me, you know, but it was, I remember that. Like, I remember the first time I had a gut feeling. And I hate to say, it wasn't, you know, when I was 10. It wasn't when I was 20. It was like, you know, 40, all right? Oh. So coming back into the body is really important. And then Thanissara, who many of you may know, Thanissara was a Buddhist teacher who was a nun for a while in the Ajahn Chah tradition, and she invites us to ask the question then, how is it now? Because sometimes we can already know what it is even before we're there. Like, how is it now? And so disengaging from that, like, I want it to be this way, or I think it should be this way, but how is it now? How is it in the body? Bringing the attention to the body and the breath. And then the sense of letting go of those preconceptions. Letting go. And I began to think about my body and my practice as more as like, you know, like the earth, like the cycles of the earth, this beginning again, rather than like that I'm set on this linear pathway, climbing the ladder of there, you know, that I'll reach this pinnacle where I'll have it made. That there's really the cycles, like the rhythms of the breath, you know, in and out, the cycles of the ocean, the waves coming. And that's found that really, really helpful to kind of begin to think of myself as part of that rhythm, as part of the cycle, that my mindfulness practice has that same rhythm, the in-breath, the out-breath, the body at ease, the body with discomfort, you know, all of these cycles. And that's the impermanence that is so hard to be with. But if we are part of that cycle, then it's there and we can just attend to it instead of bringing that judgmental mind. And I'm going to read another Pema Chodron quote. And I just have to say, like, sometimes you don't even have to read Pema Chodron's books. All you have to do is read the title. When things fall apart, hard advice for difficult times, you know, like, okay, when things fall apart, things are going to fall apart. We are hard advice for difficult times. But I'm going to read the quote anyway, so. Letting there be room for not knowing is the most important thing of all. So when we can just not know, you know, not know. And then she continues, when there's a big disappointment, we don't know if that's the end of the story. You know, so often something happens, it's like, forever I'm going to be like this. Instead, she says, it may just be the beginning of a great adventure. Life is like that. We don't know anything. We call something bad, we call it good, but really we just don't know. So I was sitting on the floor today with a little cushion, and you probably don't know, but I have 2 titanium hips. And that's why I can sit on the floor. Before, you know, like, couldn't cross my legs, you know, sometimes I would have to park, you know, right in front of the door to get in here, depending on the day. These titanium hips are amazing. So it's not like, you know, it's not like we can only use our mindfulness. We can go and get other help. You know, we are on this network of places. And, you know, when I first had it, I was just like, my life, I have been a very active, athletic person, outdoorsy, and having to go through this process and continuing to be in this body has been a challenge. And I had no idea that they could take me into the shop and give me some new hips and send me off. And then, it's not like, there wasn't some work involved and then I had to do a little exercise and whatnot. But I never thought I would sit on the cushion again, that I would be, forever relegated to the chair, which everyone says, it's fine to sit in a chair. And then in the back of your mind, you're like, yes, but the Buddha sat on it, didn't. There's one statue when I was in Thailand, I took a picture of it, that had, it was an altar with the Buddha or whoever it was sitting on a chair. But that was like all the places I went. There's only one. Most of the time so even when they say, you can sit, you can stand, you can walk, there's still, I don't know about for you, but there was always that little thing of like, so anyhow, I'm not saying to those sitting in the chair that you're doomed. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there is a possibility more than we can actually imagine, and like right now I'm doing the same thing. Those of us who are aging, I have a shoulder thing, and I'm doing the same thing, even though, like, oh my gosh, it's gonna, what's gonna happen? It's gonna get worse. I'm trying this, I'm trying that, and then it's good to attend to ourselves. Self-care is really important. And I can begin to notice the shame and the blame, though, that somehow there's something in there that I did. Like with my hips, like people would ask me, then what happened? And I'd be like, well, do you think it was because I played rugby in college? Was that the thing? Was it because I did all this hiking and carried all this weight up and down the mountains? Was it that? Was it that I was in a car accident? Was it genetic that I had arthritis? And the thing is, I started realizing that people wanted to be like, oh, I didn't do that. Good. I'm all set. I didn't do that. It's not going to be that. That they're like hoping that they didn't check the thing off of their list. Ooh, I didn't eat chocolate. Ooh, I'm going to be all set. Oh, I don't do dairy either. I'm going to be all set. Oh, I don't do that. That somehow we're going to get the magic formula, and then we're not going to have this suffering, the old age, sickness, and death. And the Buddha says with our training, the mind can be our worst enemy. The mind can make us believe that somehow we will get it right. And if we don't get it right, or the mind can be our best friend, that we can meet each moment just the way it arises. That we can meet the moment with its disappointment, with its discomfort, with its problems, with its challenges, with the challenges in here, with the challenges out there. And that the disappointment comes with a story, and that where did that story come from? Did it come from our cultural heritage? Did it come from the news? Did it come from somebody telling us what success actually looked like? And if we can let go of that and be right here, there's so much freedom in that. And that really brings me a lot of joy that this moment, there is a potential for freedom. There's a potential for not freedom too, right? Because there's a potential. There's a choice point that we can bring to each moment. Are we creating more suffering, or are we releasing ourselves from suffering? And sometimes we don't know. That's the story that Pema Chodron was saying. So I wanted to bring in this part of doing this in community, of being in community with this. And some of you may have heard of this woman, Adrienne Marie Brown, who has written a book recently called Emergent Strategies. And it's the sense of that, which really is helpful for me. We can't know all of the causes and conditions and the multiplicity of impacts. And so things are emerging out of the causes and conditions, which to me is very Buddhist, that, we don't actually know all of the things that brought us to this moment here. And she has this idea of attention liberation. So not only do we have our mindfulness, but she uses this idea that we actually can use our mindfulness to liberate ourselves. And I find this very nourishing, this idea. And she says, our attention liberation calls us, is not only a tool, but we can be able to pick your attention up from the mainstream crisis and commercials and other competitions for your money, and to put your attention where you want it and where you need it. And she says that's something she's starting to think of as attention liberation. And so I bring this in because with our training with this mind that can be our enemy or can be our friend, it's not a passive activity. We can get fed into sometimes that, negative, like, ooh, what's on Twitter? And we go there and like, all that energy that's coming, we can get really involved in it. I'm just using Twitter, and we're not going to give any names to anybody that we just over there. Or we can turn our attention to the loving community that's around us, to the relationships that we want to build. And so this is this attention liberation. So sometimes, there's so many things happening that our attention just goes here, and then boom, next crisis, our attention's here, boom, next crisis. And that happens in our lives. We have those crises, whether it be hips or partners or children or jobs. We have those crises. But even within all of that, can we have this attention liberation where we direct our mind to the nourishing parts, to that which can continue to nurture us? And so this is kind of where I think we need courage, because just to kind of be going around and reactive, to come back, to believe that it's possible that within this samsaric, this world of suffering, old age, sickness, death, competition, all of that, that there is a possibility to relate, to have these relationships that nurture, to have this intimacy, to have this relationship with myself where all the parts are okay. All the parts are okay here, so then I'm going to invite all of you in, even if you're not exactly how I want you to be all the time, right? So that if we can be okay with these cycles, with this natural rhythms of the world within ourselves and out there, and bring this mind heartfulness, this loving attention to each moment, then we can begin to make choices that will point us in the direction towards freedom, so that we can have mindfulness internally, mindfulness externally, and hold ourselves. So, letting go of the idea, this fantasy of control, and holding ourselves in this place of, this is I can plan for the future. And believe me, I have a little pension now, I have these different things. So it's not like we have to just be like, put up our hands and, we're on the roller coaster, but we really are. We can still make plans, and even the best of plans. So, we set our ducks up in the row, or whatever you are, plants, vegetarians, or, whatever you're setting up in the row there. And, like herding cats, right? They're all gonna go which way. And then we just come back to our practice. How is it now? How is it now? What's it like in the body? Oh, I did this yesterday. How is it today? How is it now? So, maybe you've heard some of the Nasruddin stories. Mm-hmm. Nasruddin was a Persian philosopher. And so Nasruddin was sitting on a riverbank, and someone shouted to him from the opposite side, "Hey, how do I get to the other side?" And Nasruddin shouted back, "You are on the other side." So it's all a matter of perspective. Sometimes you think you're up and you're down and you're down and you're up. And so, like Pema Chodron said, you think it's like it's a huge disappointment, and then it provides you an opportunity. And so what we can bring, this kind of open awareness, this loving awareness, this possibility that freedom exists. And freedom is not anything that we can have it on our own. Freedom is not an individual thing. We can't ever be free unless we're in relationship to the whole world. And so to me, that's part of this rhythms, the cycles, this earthiness of the Dharma that sometimes gets left out here in the West, where we, have built our society so far from the earth. That as we connect to ourselves and our mindfulness, as we connect to each other through our differences, with our differences, in our differences, and all of those parts of ourself, that we can really bring this richness of the earth, of each moment, of the possibilities. One of the things that brings me great hope, and I didn't do it today because I wasn't in a lot of traffic on the bridge, but if you're coming from Oakland over here, you're often sitting, going through the tolls. And if you notice, there's little cracks in the road. And on the road in there's little plants growing. I mean, how many thousands, probably more than thousands, right, of cars go through there a day? But the earth is resilient. I mean, we humans, who knows about us? Or we don't know what's going to happen, but the earth, that plants can grow when thousands of cars go over the Bay Bridge every day. That means there's something beyond this kind of small mind, that this mindfulness, this practice that I can do over and over again, that to me, that there may be a potential for me to have some freedom, that I can maybe make choices that bring my life more freedom. So I've shared with you some of my thoughts today on mindfulness, and I feel so fortunate to have started on this journey towards Buddhism because it has brought me a lot more freedom in my life. And so I'm sharing this for you from my perspective, and you may have a different perspective, and I hope to engage in this dialogue with you to hear some about what your experiences are and your learning, and that if there's something that I've said that might not kind of align with what you said, I really would feel that would be fertile territory for us to kind of engage together around it. So I'm really a learner and appreciate your inviting me here to share today. So thank you for your attention. So I've been told by Baruch that you are a very inquisitive bunch and have lots of things to say. Baruch is a good friend of mine. I know he's here often, and so we have time for questions now.
Yes, right.
And sharing.
Yeah,
so
10 minutes.
And I'm hard of hearing, so if you could speak up, that would be great.
Well, first I apologize for not having anything to argue about. I really love to talk, and it brought up so much in me that I would want to say back to you, what it brought up, but I will just say thank you for bringing loving awareness, which is close to my heart. I've kind of fallen in love with awareness and feeling like it's the eternal part of my consciousness, and it made, as I practice it, enabled me to observe. That's what awareness is doing. But one word that came up for me during your talk was forgiveness, which I have felt is very important as a letting go process. When there's something that really disappoints me in myself, if I can forgive myself, then I can move on. And it's really what you said, in other words. So thank you.
Thank you. Please.
I was very pleased, and thank you very much for the talk. I was very pleased to hear you talk about heartfulness rather than mindfulness. I've been bothered by the concept of mindfulness, perhaps beginning, but certainly ever since I started hearing about corporate mindfulness. And I began to realize that maybe mindfulness is part of a narrative that I'm not sure I want to be totally involved with. Patriarchy, you might want to call it. And so a focus on a different kind of attention, I think is very valuable. So thank you.
Yeah, I particularly think since mindfulness has become so widespread, and mindfulness now can be used so that you can become a better worker, so that you can pay more attention to sitting in your cubicle and doing your work without distraction. Really, is that freedom? So I appreciate that, kind of tying it into the place where we are now with, how mindfulness is so widespread, like be mindful. So yeah, there's a lacking, something missing in that translation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Please.
Could you say more about you can't be free on your own? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah. I was definitely stepping out on a limb there, so thanks for pointing it out.
Because I've had the feeling I'm kind of a loner, or was originally, and the only way to be free is to be alone, I don't feel that way quite so much now, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm saying it from a very particular positionality. In the U.S., we have been taught this radical individualism, and, in the tradition of the Buddha, there were lots of people who went out into the caves and practiced on their own. And so I've been trying to investigate what does it mean for me coming from a place where individualism was touted versus like someone in the culture of the Buddha that is a much more collective culture to go away. And so like there's different, and I don't know the answer to that, the cultural implications of it. But here, so my thought that I've come to understanding on is that if somebody's practicing in the cave in Buddhism, way back or even now, that there's still an understanding that I'm dependent on this whole network of the earth, of, all these things. Whereas here, when we're practicing individually, there's really a thought that I can do this on my own. That, that I'm not really connecting to somebody who's cooking me food, bringing me food, like the people who make my clothes, that I'm just, so individualism is, I think, a poison that can disconnect us from each other, because inherently, then we can get back to, if you really want to go deep, we can get into anatta, which is no self, non-separation. There isn't an inherent self, and so we can't, if there isn't a self, there isn't an individual, and we really are part of each other. So, I don't know, that's kind of where I'm going with it. So as long as we think that I'm going to do this on my own, I don't think we're going to reach freedom. But that's, like I said, I hope that you can just prove me, because it would be great if I could just do it, boom, Actually, it wouldn't be so great, but yeah. So thank you. Please.
Yes. Other than Nasruddin, you quoted female Buddhists today. Are you drawn to the emerging feminine leadership in American Buddhism, or have you encountered issues with the patriarchy and Buddhist trainings in Asia?
I am drawn to the margins of the story. And in Buddhism in the U.S. and the West, there's definitely for more of the women Buddhists. And Larry Yang is my mentor right now in the teacher training at Spirit Rock. And so I don't think it's particularly people who are female. I think it's particularly people who want to widen the lens. And so the other person who I've really been listening a lot to now is Rob Burbia, who's a British insight teacher. He has a book that came out a number of years ago, Seeing That Frees, and so he's from Gaia House. And so I don't think it's just particularly, but the patriarchy is definitely insidious and, gets its way in, I would kind of put in the heteropatriarchy, because the patriarchy often assumes, kind of a very straight mindset as well. So trying to move away, and I think of that as a very linear paradigm, and then kind of a more cyclical. And I would say, and I would think, kind of within us all, we have this, all have the feminine and the masculine within us in different manifestations. So it could be that people who are born female are able to manifest that aspect, but not all the time. So I don't know, I didn't really answer your question, but I hope I gave you some.
No, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for your talk.
One more question? Well, I have.
Oh, please.
So, the idea of being drawn to the margins and the diversity of the sangha in the East Bay, is that something that's a reflection of, well, that's the East Bay, or was it sort of an intentional work at making a diverse sangha happen?
Yeah, it was intentional. And so one of the things that has happened in many places is that there's a sangha that, was started, so you have like Spirit Rock, which was started by a lot of white Buddhist teachers, very well trained, very, knowledgeable and informative. And then the people who were attracted there were often white as well. And so the story really resonated with that community. And then the idea is like, oh, well, we want to reach more people. How can we reach more people? And so at EBMC, there was an intention, people who were trained initially from Spirit Rock Meditation Center, and then some others came in as well, that we want to start this in a different way. We want to prioritize people of color, queer people, just people who are disabled, people who haven't been prioritized and at other centers. And so that was the foundation. So we have had a very different orientation rather than kind of having to change it to make it more diverse. The idea was to make it more diverse. And so for the first, almost 3/4 of a year, we've been around 12 years now, so there wasn't a sangha the first sangha there was a people of color sangha. And then the second sangha there was the alphabet sangha, the LGBTQI. And so, because what happens is that the ignorance of the privilege means that sometimes if you come in as a white person, if you come in from your place of privilege, that we don't always know, we're not always conscious. There's such a delusion around the atmosphere that we're creating that if somebody comes in who's different, then sometimes there's such a diluted mindfulness that we think we're seeing clearly, but we're not. And so there was a real intentional kind of, how do we create something where people will feel welcome? And I have felt, so the idea and there's also just the intentional, it's like not something that you can do, you have to keep coming back to it. Mm-hmm. It's like that sense of well, I did my diversity training last year, but then but now there's more, it's definitely part of this whole, unconscious, our delusion, our ignorance, that part of we often look at our greed and hatred, but if we look at the delusion, the third part, the confusion, a lot of that to me is our unconscious, how do we, in the world, and how do we create these spaces that are welcoming for people, so.
It's like having to be aware of what we're not aware of.
Yes. Thank you.
I just want to say one thing.
Oh, please.
How long has that sangha been around?
12 years.
Yeah, because when I first went, I realized how young it is. Most of the Buddhists I've come into have been, my age, Jack Cornfield, and down about 10 years. And I was so happy to see a whole lot of youngsters starting out. And it should be. That's just a big difference in that sangha.
Yeah. It has been a doorway for a lot of people to come in, and I feel so grateful for that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
So JD's website is www.heartmindteaching.com. So please stay and enjoy the fellowship of the Sangha. We have some vegan cookies and some fruit, some hot water for tea. If you have tea, please put your cup in. Oh, actually, wash your cup. With hot soapy water.
Why can't you put it in the dishwasher?
Because the dishwasher is full of clean dishes at the moment.
Oh, we could take the dishes out.
Possibilities.
Let's have a consultation if you have tea when you want to dispose of your cup. So I will also be going around with a Dana bowl. Dana sustains our Sangha, pays for the rent, Larkin Street dinners, honorariums for our speakers and teachers, or Dana for our speakers and teachers. And some people gather at the front door at 12:30 to go to lunch. Everybody's welcome to join in that. So, are there any other announcements?
I wanted to invite people to a concert. My husband and I are in the Golden Gate Men's Chorus, and there are some flyers out on the table. Our concerts start Thursday, and we have 5 of them this coming Thursday through the following Tuesday. It's a variety of music, some religious, some silly, and it's going to be really fun.
Our speaker next week is Charlie Garfield. He's kind of that.
Founder of Shanti and Shanti National Training Institute. A mathematician on the Apollo 11 first lunar landing. And published 10 books. So can we gather for any other announcements?
Oh, I was supposed to say that I'm going to be back in January with Baruch.
Oh, yes.
Baruch, there's going to be a 4-week series on intimacy. So I'm going to come in for one of those.
Super. 4 weeks.
It's going to be just a conversation. So
let's gather in a circle for a dedication of marriage.
Taking a moment to pause and reflect on our time together this morning. Knowing how deeply our lives intertwine, all of those here are many beings in all directions, in all worlds. May we offer any merit from our time together to all beings in all directions. May all beings without exception be free from suffering and the causes of suffering.
Thank you, Jamie.
Oh, no, we don't.
Oh, okay. Like, how do we know?
Maybe we should.
Thank you for the word for all these years. I think I'm switching.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.